Has America ever truly been free? Or were we simply conditioned to believe we are? Because the story I'm about to tell you today isn't a story of success as you know it. This is the story of how America was quietly bought. A purchase that took place without bloodshed, without coups, and without the involvement of voting booths. There was a man. He was not a president, not a general, nor was he elected by the people. But he took the energy veins, the banks, the politicians, and the future of America into his hands, one by one. And no, this is not a conspiracy theory. This story stands in official documents, court records, and the footnotes of history books specifically hidden from your sight. John D. Rockefeller. If we are talking about oil prices today, if we accept giant corporations we call too big to fail as normal, if we know that a few financial institutions keep the entire system upright, the reason is not modern capitalism. The reason is the Rockefeller model. And the truly disturbing part is this model never disappeared. It only changed names. In this video, I will show you how one man turned the free market into a controlled cage, how he systematically destroyed competition, and how he locked the economic steering wheel of America under the guise of freedom. But more importantly, I will show you why the system is still working. Because Rockefeller didn't just sell oil. Rockefeller sold an order, and America bought this order. Every major financial story you watch today, every giant corporation, every crisis, they are all a continuation of this story. And if you stay until the end of this video, you will see very clearly, Rockefeller is not a figure left in the past. He is still the man who writes the rules of the game. Now the real question is, how was this system established? And why are we still inside it? Now I will show you how John D. Rockefeller quietly shaped America's economic fate, but first I want to start with a question. When you think a country is free, are you really the one making the decisions, or is an invisible hand writing them on your behalf? Rockefeller seized not just the oil, but the rules of the market and the trust of the people. By the end of the 19th century, America was in a state of rapid change. The industrial explosion, the rise of railroads, and urbanization brought new opportunities and new risks. People wanted to grow their businesses, invest, and gain wealth. But in the middle of this chaos was a man whose every move was carefully planned, every step supported by an invisible strategy. Rockefeller didn't just establish Standard Oil. He also rewrote the logic of the American free market. The methods used to eliminate competition in the sector were so sophisticated that no one noticed they were being held captive within the system. If giant corporations and banks are called too big to fail today, it stems from Rockefeller's application of this logic. Now let me tell you another truth. Rockefeller's power was not limited to oil tankers and refineries. He was suffocating his rivals by controlling railroad transportation and directing the market by determining shipping prices. Rivals lost their businesses trying to solve his strategies, and the market slowly fell into the hands of Standard Oil. But pay attention, this was not a show of force. This was an engineering masterpiece. Rockefeller's strategy was to establish a network that was invisible but whose effect was felt everywhere. And the most terrifying part was that this network was mostly unnoticed by the public. People celebrated the success story of a wealthy businessman, failing to realize he was rewriting the rules of the system. But what was truly shocking was the way Rockefeller obtained this power. He skillfully used legal loopholes and controlled his rivals through bargaining, debt, and even secret agreements. When some investors understood his game, they did their best to counter every move of Standard Oil. But they were usually too late. And here, a question comes to mind. If one man can alone control the market, then was there a real free market, or was it just an illusion of freedom? Rockefeller's answer was clear. The free market was no different from a trap if strategy and knowledge were lacking. And the interesting part is, Rockefeller was playing a psychological game as well as a financial one. He used the media and the press to convince the public and investors, making everyone a partner in his success story. People saw him as America's modern miracle, yet the truth was much deeper. Power was not measured only by goods and money. Knowledge, strategy, and the ability to rewrite the rules of the system were the real weapons. And as a viewer, you now have a question in your mind. If this is what Rockefeller did, do we realize what game we are in today? At the end of this chapter, what needs to be remembered is this. Rockefeller didn't just sell oil, he reshaped the economic backbone of America. By the time his rivals opened their eyes, it was too late. He had rewritten the market and the rules in his favor. And as a viewer, your task is to understand how this system still works and why most of us are unaware of it. In the next chapter, I will explain the details of Rockefeller's massive network, his financial maneuvers, and especially how he became almost invisible to the public and the state. Don't worry. Next are such surprising facts that you will fully see behind America's mask of freedom. One of the darkest aspects of John D. Rockefeller's power was the mechanism that made him almost invisible. While people talked about the massive size of Standard Oil and praised his wealth, what Rockefeller actually controlled was being overlooked. Financial networks, political connections, and public perception. In the last quarter of the 19th century, America was in the midst of a giant industrial explosion. While railroads connected the country, cities were rising and factories were working incessantly. In this very atmosphere of chaos, Rockefeller, by planning every move one step ahead, eliminated his rivals and slowly turned their economic power in his favor. His strategy was not just to grow a company. It was to fundamentally change the way the American free market functioned. As rivals tried to figure him out, they became trapped in a deeper web, their every move swallowed by the system. Yet, this process was carried out so masterfully that the public mostly did not notice, merely celebrating the success story of a wealthy businessman. Standard Oil's expansion strategy was not limited to horizontal growth. It seized the entire supply chain through vertical integration. Refineries, warehouses, shipping routes, railroad tariffs, and port usage rights fell into Rockefeller's control one by one. Rivals were slowly erased through price wars, secret agreements, and debt pressure, changing the power balance of the market in Rockefeller's favor. And again, no one noticed. Everyone was looking only at the surface, unable to see the actual mechanism. This was the chilling part. Power was not measured only by goods and money. Knowledge, strategy, and the ability to rewrite the rules of the system were the real weapons. Rockefeller knew this, and his rivals were drawn into his trap, often without realizing it. But even more striking was Rockefeller's relationship with the political system. His complex relationships with government officials, railroad managers, and bankers provided him with invisible power. Public policies, tax regulations, legal loopholes, all were used strategically in Rockefeller's favor. At that time, no one in America questioned this, failing to understand how the system was manipulated behind the rhetoric of free market and competition. This was not just businessman intelligence, it was a type of social engineering. Economy, law, and politics had become mere tools. Rockefeller's psychological maneuvers were as powerful as his financial moves. The press and media reinforced his success story, making the public and investors partners in this narrative. People saw the growth of Standard Oil as a natural process, whereas every step was part of a planned and calculated strategy. And the terrifying part of the business was that this strategy often went unnoticed. While rivals struggled, the public cheered. While the success story was applauded, the rules of the system were being written by Rockefeller. Another profound truth was Rockefeller's intelligence regarding risk management. Investments, debts, agreements, and speculations were designed to form a network in his favor. If there was a crisis or collapse, only the investor's capital was at risk. Rockefeller's personal fortune was almost untouchable. This logic of limited liability became one of the cornerstones of modern corporations, but Rockefeller was the first to use it systematically. And the ironic part was that under America's rhetoric of freedom, its economic fate was entirely under the control of one person or group. Rockefeller rewrote the rules of the free market in such a way that an invisible hand began to overshadow the will of the people. Competition was destroyed, prices were manipulated, and the system turned into a control mechanism beyond the American dream. Investors and citizens, without realizing this massive web of power, simply drifted with the current. This complex web of power formed the basis of the legacy Rockefeller left to future generations. Even with the dissolution and restructuring of Standard Oil, the rules of the system continued to be shaped by his logic. Today, many large companies and financial institutions still act under the direct or indirect influence of this logic. Rockefeller didn't just sell oil. He sold the control template of the American economic system. And without anyone noticing, this template became the invisible backbone of modern capitalism. On the economic stage of America, there was a man named John D. Rockefeller. While hundreds of people talked about his business and praised his wealth, what he actually controlled eluded most. But what was the way to understand that this man was no ordinary businessman? On the surface, he was just selling oil, but in reality, he controlled all the veins of the American economy. The size and success of his companies were just the beginning. The real power lay in the invisible networks he built. Investors, rival companies, railroads, and even some politicians often acted without realizing his plans. And here a question comes to mind. If one person can direct the entire market mechanism so masterfully, was there a real free market, or was it just an illusion? Rockefeller developed very sophisticated methods to increase the power of Standard Oil. He controlled his rivals one by one through bargaining, debt, and secret agreements. He didn't just buy another company while one was going bankrupt. He also determined the prices and transportation in that sector. By controlling the railroads, he made it difficult for his rivals to transport goods and shaped market prices in his favor. But he did this so masterfully that most people didn't even notice. While the public was fascinated by the success stories presented by the media and the press, Rockefeller's power web was slowly enveloping all of America. The most dangerous thing about this web was that it was often invisible. The destruction of competition and the control of markets were perceived by ordinary observers merely as success in the business world. Investors, without realizing they were part of this massive strategy, invested money in Standard Oil and served its growth. Rockefeller's intelligence was hidden here, shaping the entire economy in his favor quietly, without showing power to the public or rivals. But this was not just a financial and economic design. It was a design of the human mind. Rockefeller understood that to control the future, he had to control the people who would work in his factories. In 1903, he founded the General Education Board. His goal was not to raise geniuses or independent thinkers. He famously said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." He reshaped the American school system to mirror his factories. The school bells were synchronized with factory whistles. The rows of desks were designed like assembly lines. He replaced the quest for wisdom with the habit of obedience. By funding the curriculum, he ensured that future generations would never question the invisible hand that owned the system. He wasn't just buying oil, he was buying the minds of the next century. Rockefeller's financial and political network details were astounding. He controlled not only Standard Oil but also American banks, ports, and railroads, directing state authorities in line with his plans. He skillfully used legal loopholes, neutralized rivals with bargaining and debt, and even directed them with secret agreements in some cases. As rivals tried to figure out his moves, Standard Oil grew even stronger. And perhaps the most chilling part was that most people and state officials didn't even realize it. This invisible power web was the symbol of an order that rewrote the rules of the American economy, not just a businessman. And another surprising aspect, Rockefeller's strategy directly influenced today's appearance of modern capitalism. Today, the fact that giant companies are called too big to fail, that a few financial giants keep the entire system standing, and that the impact of major crises cannot be predicted is actually a continuation of the Rockefeller model. He didn't just sell oil. He changed the rules of the system, regulated competition in his favor, and created an invisible empire. The influence of this web continues even today, and at the root of modern financial structures lies this masterfully planned strategy of Rockefeller. There was a man on the economic stage of America named John D. Rockefeller, but his power was not limited to oil tankers and refineries. Can you imagine a man controlling a country's economy, its banks, and even its policies with just a few companies? Right here is a truth you need to open your eyes to. Rockefeller's games were so deep and sophisticated that the public and the state often didn't even realize what was happening. And I must tell you, you will be shocked by what I am about to tell you in this chapter. Because what seems like the story of an ordinary businessman was actually an invisible takeover of the American economy. Rockefeller used versatile and clever maneuvers to increase the power of Standard Oil. He neutralized his rivals through bargaining, debt, and sometimes secret agreements. But this was not an ordinary strategy. On the contrary, it was an engineering masterpiece. For example, through special agreements with railroad companies, he increased the transportation costs of his rivals and directed the market in his favor. These moves were part of a web that most observers passed over without understanding. While people focused on the success story of Standard Oil, in reality, every price change and every ton of oil transported served Rockefeller's invisible web. But Rockefeller's influence did not stop at oil or schools. It reached into the very bodies of every American. Before his rise, medicine was a diverse world of natural cures and herbal remedies. Rockefeller saw this as unorganized competition. In 1910, through the Flexner Report, he used his massive wealth to transform medical education. He ensured that any school not focusing on patented, petroleum-based chemical drugs was shut down or defunded. He effectively monopolized human health. Natural medicine was labeled as quackery, while the pill-based pharmaceutical industry, which he owned, became the only scientific way. He didn't just want to fuel your car. He wanted to own the chemicals flowing through your veins. By creating a system that treats symptoms rather than curing diseases, he turned the entire population into lifelong customers of his chemical empire. The most surprising part was that Rockefeller's financial web remained completely hidden from the public. Banks, investors, and government officials often acted without realizing his strategies. As rivals tried to figure out his moves, Standard Oil grew even stronger. And here a question arises. If a man can control the market and some mechanisms of the state so masterfully, was there really a free market, or was it just an illusion? And furthermore, if this is how the system works, can we see the traces of these invisible strategies at the root of today's giant financial titans and crises? Rockefeller's tactics were not only financial, they were extraordinarily effective psychologically. By manipulating the media and the press, Standard Oil rose as a success story in the eyes of the public. But in reality, this power web was completely invisible to the public. People celebrated him as America's modern miracle, but they were actually moving under the influence of the man who rewrote the rules of a system. And now think about this. If these strategies paved the way for modern financial giants, is the same logic still in effect today in the rise of giant crises and too-big-to-fail companies? Rockefeller's invisible empire, while laying the foundation of modern capitalism, was silently destroying its rivals within the system and constantly reinforcing its financial and psychological superiority. Every investment, every secret agreement, and every media move made his web even stronger. And the most striking part was that this power was almost invisible in the eyes of the public. Today, when you learn this story, you can realize how that web and those strategies are still effective in the American and world economy. John D. Rockefeller's power was not limited to refineries and tankers. The truly terrifying part was the invisible but omnipresent nature of the network he built. Almost all of America's financial and industrial mechanisms were shaped according to his strategies. Railroad lines, banks, investors, and even state policies were often in the hands of Standard Oil without even realizing it. But this power was not limited to direct control. Rockefeller's strategy was more sophisticated. He imprisoned his rivals within the system, turning competition into an invisible cage. Every connection in his web was a trap to turn the economy in his favor, and most people played his game without realizing this complex structure. So how did this network work? First of all, the flow of information was under complete control. Rivals and investors could never see the true situation in the market, and when they made a move, they were already too late. Railroad agreements, shipping prices, and debt mechanisms were so masterfully planned that even someone looking from the outside could see everything as a coincidence. However, every move had been calculated years in advance. Rockefeller's shocking intelligence and strategic planning ability made him not just a businessman, but an invisible emperor. But the truly frightening part was that the public and the media were also included in his game. The image reflected to the public through the press consisted only of a success story. It presented Rockefeller as a modern American miracle, while the actual complexity of the matter was overlooked. While people celebrated the success stories, they did not realize that the rules of the system were being rewritten. At this point, the curiosity hook kicks in. If one person can provide control in such an invisible way, who might be holding the invisible strings of markets and the economy today? Perhaps the most striking aspect of Rockefeller's strategy was the combination of financial and psychological games. His rivals could not predict his moves, and investors acted only with expectations of profit. But every move ensured that the system worked in his favor. In this way, Standard Oil not only dominated the oil market but also determined the boundaries of the American free market. So much so that today's concept of too big to fail was a continuation of the invisible network Rockefeller established. And the even more striking part was that this network was almost completely invisible to the public and the state. Laws and regulations were often far from hindering his strategies, because Rockefeller skillfully used legal loopholes and directed his rivals through debt and secret agreements. By the time some investors realized his game, it was too late. At this point, the curiosity hook kicks in again. If one person alone can rewrite the market and the rules, was there a real free market, or was it just an illusion of freedom? Finally, Rockefeller's network did not only shape the American economy, it also influenced the foundations of global finance. The way big companies and financial giants keep the system standing today was a direct continuation of his model. Therefore, the network he established at the end of the 19th century has come down to the present day not only as a business empire but as an invisible world order. And now, at the point we have reached, let us review the truths behind this entire complex and invisible web once more. We must now fully understand how John D. Rockefeller quietly seized the economic steering wheel of America, and how he turned not just oil but market rules, banks, the energy sector, and public trust in his favor. His strategies, which eliminated competition and imprisoned rivals in an almost invisible cage within the system, laid the foundations of not just that era but also today's economy. The rise of Standard Oil, the control of railroad transportation, the determination of shipping prices, and the directing of all market movements through secret agreements were not just a show of power, but an engineering masterpiece. Rivals and investors, no matter how hard they tried, often could not resist Rockefeller's moves, and the process worked in his favor without being noticed. And the core truth here was this: the free market was nothing more than an illusion unless your knowledge, strategy, and planning were at Rockefeller's level. Rockefeller's power was not just financial. There was also a psychological game at play. Convincing the public through the media and the press, and making investors partners in his success story, allowed him to be seen as America's modern miracle. Yet the truth was much deeper. Power was not measured by goods and money. The real weapon was knowledge, strategy, and the ability to rewrite the rules of the system. The elimination of competition, the control of prices, and the invisible but tight management of the market showed that Rockefeller was no ordinary businessman. He was the man who shaped the economic backbone of America and established a real order behind the mask of the free market. But there is another point to consider here. This power did not rest solely in Rockefeller's hands. The financial system, politicians, and public perception were made to work for him as a whole. Banks, investors, and industry leaders often became part of the system without being aware of his strategies. This laid the foundations of modern capitalism, the giant corporations and financial titans called too big to fail. Today's speculations, arbitrages, and investment games on Wall Street are a direct continuation of the logic Rockefeller established a century ago. When we look at today's world, the giant investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, which own almost everything, are simply the modern face of the Rockefeller model. The names have changed, but the monopoly has only perfected itself. And now the real question comes: is this power and control still valid? Rockefeller's order has not ended today. The names may have changed, but the logic, the system, and the rules are still the same. Large energy companies, financial giants, and networks connected to the government continue the strategies of that era in their modern forms today. Under the rumors of market freedom and competition, real control is still concentrated in a few hands. America's economic steering wheel is still managed by invisible hands, and most people are unaware of it. Stepping back to look at the whole picture, Rockefeller didn't just sell oil. He reshaped America's economic framework, financial mechanisms, and market perception. He eliminated competition, controlled prices, directed investors, and most of the public became part of this order without even realizing what was happening. This story is not only a historical success story, but also a critical guide to understanding the roots of today's economic order. Every crisis, every giant corporation, every financial fluctuation comes before us as a reflection of Rockefeller's logic. Finally, the most important message of this video is this: the invisible networks between big financial powers, the market, and the state are not just a part of history but the cornerstones of the system still actively functioning today. The order established by Rockefeller is not just a name, but a model, a logic, and a strategy. And this strategy continues to quietly direct America's economic fate. If you had questions while watching this video, you should now have found all the answers. How control of the markets was seized, how competition was eliminated, what real powers were at work under the mask of the free market, and how this system works today. All of these stand before us as living proof of Rockefeller's legacy. So, do you think this system established by Rockefeller still works the same way today? Or are we just watching the same games with new names? If you still feel moved and surprised after watching this video, don't keep it to yourself. Discuss it in the comments, share your views, and express your thoughts. By hitting the like button and subscribing, you can ensure the continuation of such in-depth analyses. Because just watching is not enough. Learning, discussing, and understanding truly complete this story. Now, when you look back and think about the entire video once more, you can see that John Davison Rockefeller was not just a businessman, but a genius who quietly seized America's economic system, and perhaps from now on, you will never look at the concepts of the free market and freedom the same way again.